You were never supposed to hear this. In the spring of 1892, a flood exposed more than just waterlogged earth outside Hollow Creek, Montana. It unearthed the buried remains of travelers, miners, and strangers who were never meant to be found. What the town had called the finest butcher family in the territory was in truth a lineage of predators, silent, calculating, and ancient in their methods. The Graver family didn't just feed the town, they fed on it, and the town knew. At some primal level, every man who tasted that meat, every woman who bought the salted elk jerky, they all knew something was wrong. But fear is a powerful seasoning, and survival even more so. This isn't just a tale of cannibalism, it's about control, psychological, ancestral, ritualistic. What the Gravens did wasn't madness, it was a blueprint, one used long before Montana, long before America, back when villages fed sacrifices to the land to ensure survival. They weren't insane, they were following orders, ancient, whispered ones, and now, more than a century later, the blueprint has evolved, but it's still active in your food, in your beliefs, in your silence, because the moment you accept comfort over truth, you've already fed the beast. Keep watching. You won't come out the same. Elias Graven didn't build a smokehouse to preserve meat. He built it to erase evidence. The Civil War had taught him how to vanish bodies, how to dismantle men until they were no longer men but inventory. What he passed on to his children wasn't just survival, it was doctrine. The Gravens weren't serial killers in the Hollywood sense. They were part of something older, a familial priesthood of blood, where each body served a purpose. Food, fertilizer, fear. Their rituals were not random. They mirrored the ancient Celtic rites of the Wicker Man, the Slavic bone houses, the native flesh offerings misinterpreted and then co-opted. Every dismemberment had geometry. Every meal had intention. And the town, though it never admitted it, benefited. People stopped going missing once they started turning a blind eye. Accidents decreased. Harvests improved. Prosperity bloomed. And that is the deepest infection, when evil becomes useful. The Gravens didn't just kill, they turned horror into harmony, and when the flood came, when the truth finally surfaced, the town's first reaction wasn't horror, it was fear of losing what the Gravens gave them. Think about that. A family fed its community human flesh for nearly a decade, and the community grew stronger. What does that say about civilization? What does that say about you? This isn't just about a crime. It's about the moment a society decides that blood is acceptable, as long as it's not their own. That moment still exists. It's happening now, in boardrooms, in hospitals, in fields of engineered crops and broken mines. The only thing that's changed is the packaging. You're not watching a horror story. You're staring into the mirror of consent. The eldest daughter, Miriam Graven, was the face the town trusted. The soft smile behind the counter, the warm voice offering stew to strangers, the delicate hands that wrote ledger notes while blood soaked the sawdust beneath her boots. But Miriam wasn't innocent. She was the lure. Groomed to disarm suspicion, she turned femininity into a weapon sharper than any blade in their smokehouse. She didn't seduce her victims. She mothered them, pitied them, gave them warmth in a land that punished weakness. And when they fell asleep by her hearth, she slit their throats with precision. This wasn't cruelty. It was ritual cleansing. She believed it deeply. The Gravens taught their children that most people were lost meat, flesh walking without purpose. And to harvest that meat was mercy. Do you understand what that means? They didn't just commit atrocities, they reframed morality itself. In their eyes, you weren't human unless you served their system. This doctrine, sick as it seems, is not isolated to a forgotten family in the woods. It exists now, in tech, in media, in how you're marketed to, distracted, drained. You are either a participant in the system or you're meat. Harsh, yes, but necessary, because Miriam's role wasn't just historical, it was prophetic. Look around. How many modern Miriams disarm you with soft smiles while feeding your identity to systems you don't understand? How many lies do you swallow daily because they're served warm? The Graven family didn't vanish. They evolved, changed names, changed methods, And most of all, they learned that if you teach people to call their chains protection, they'll never take them off. Are you starting to feel it? That tension in your chest, that awareness blooming in your spine? That's not fear, it's awakening. Keep going. You're not even halfway down the rabbit hole. When the sheriff arrived at the Graven property in April of 1892, he wasn't alone. He brought 6 armed men, each one shaken by the whispers but certain of their duty. What they found was silence. No movement, no fire, no smoke from the chimney, just a thick stench of rot and a stack of salted meat curing in the cellar, marbled and pink, too large to be deer. The sheriff descended into the smokehouse alone, pistol drawn. He was never seen again. The men waited. Hours passed. Then one by one they began to leave, afraid to speak of what they smelled, of what they knew. Days later, the flood came. Bones floated through the yard like driftwood. Femurs, jawbones, ribs, small ones. Female, children. The town was faced with a truth it couldn't outrun. But instead of outrage, there was a sickening pause. Then came the silence. The missing posters were pulled down. The Graven property was burned, not by law but by fearful hands who wanted the evidence gone, because the people of Hollow Creek had eaten those bodies. They had thrived from them. That guilt, too heavy to bear, was buried with the ashes. And this is the great manipulation. When corruption is mutual, exposure is suicide. So instead, they buried the story, turned the page, built a church over the land, and swore to forget. But blood never forgets, and neither do systems built on it. This story isn't about rural horror, it's about the birth of collusion, the silent agreement between predator and prey. You think you're safe because you follow rules, obey laws, buy clean packages with neat labels, but you're still eating what they give you, still swallowing what they serve. The faces have changed. The butcher shop is now a boardroom, the cleaver is now a contract, and Miriam's hands, they're typing policy. Are you beginning to see the edges of the illusion? This isn't history, it's a template, a warning, and if you're ready to step through the smoke, keep watching. What comes next will burn everything you thought was real. There's a reason the Graven family was never found, not a single body, not a single trace, because they didn't run, they were taken, protected, absorbed. The truth no one dares utter is that their disappearance was orchestrated by something far larger than local law. Elias had kept meticulous journals filled with symbols, anatomical diagrams, and coded phrases that linked his practices to ancient European blood cults. Rites traced to the Black Forest, the Carpathians, and deeper still into Mesopotamian sacrifice systems. The carvings on the underside of the smokehouse beams were not decorative. They were seals, protection sigils, contracts, and when the town's silence proved their loyalty, the Gravens were lifted out, not punished, but rewarded, relocated, renamed, re-weaponized. This is how systems of shadow perpetuate, by offering power to those willing to defy conscience. You think governments are always in control? That justice is blind? No. Power protects its own, and when it finds a family capable of turning horror into supply chains, death into sustenance, fear into profit, it doesn't destroy them, it promotes them. You've seen it, haven't you? Institutions caught in atrocities that vanish overnight, programs that exploit, harvest, manipulate, and yet remain untouched. The Gravens were just one node in a wider network, a pilot test in using blood as currency, belief as anesthesia. And you've inherited that system. It's all around you, sanitized, digital, efficient, but just as sinister. You were born into it, and you were never given the choice to see it, until now. You're not watching this by accident. Something in you stirred, something that knows the meal you've been fed all your life was never nourishment. It was sedation. If you've made it this far, the spell is breaking. Comment this phrase now. No one feeds me but truth. Type it twice. Say it aloud. Let the algorithm know you're not food. You're awake. And what comes next? It will separate the consumers from the creators. The meat from the mind. Keep watching. You want to know what happened after they vanished? The Graven lineage didn't die. It evolved, refined, disappeared into clean suits and clean records. By 1904, a new name appeared on the meatpacking records in Chicago, E.G. Provisions, boasting revolutionary preservation techniques and unmatched flavor quality. Their products spread quickly, served in railcars, military bases, private clubs. But no one questioned the sources. No one traced the supply lines. No one asked why their profits surged while others collapsed. Because the system doesn't punish origins, it launders them. Just like old money hides behind trust funds, old blood hides behind legacy industries. And the Gravens understood this better than most. They stopped using cleavers and started using pens. They replaced the smokehouse with warehouses, and the rituals, they never stopped. They simply became efficient. Every economic collapse, every wartime draft, every crisis, you think they're random? No, they're cycles, culling cycles. Engineered to remove the undesirables and fatten the compliant. Just like livestock, just like the drifters Miriam once lured with a smile. This is the truth no one tells you. Most of society was designed to keep you in a loop of consumption, sedation, and disposal. From cradle to grave, you're offered safety in exchange for sovereignty, but the cost is your identity, your awareness, your ability to question. The Gravens may be ghosts to history, but they are architects of your reality. And you're either part of the harvest or you become the blade. That choice doesn't come through rebellion. It comes through recognition, knowing the signs, reading the symbols, seeing the design behind the illusion. You're standing on a threshold few ever reach. Cross it and nothing will ever taste the same. Not food, not truth, not trust. Keep your eyes open, because what comes next, it's the part they buried even deeper. There's a forgotten blueprint beneath every modern institution, beneath hospitals, universities, military complexes, a silent echo of the Graven philosophy, that those who control flesh control fate. You think medicine is just about healing, education about empowerment? Look again, look deeper. The language has changed, but the framework remains. Categorize, diagnose, process, package. From farm to school to office to retirement, you're placed into compartments labeled by systems that track your usefulness until your expiration. The Gravens did it with meat hooks. Today it's done with algorithms, biometric data, credit scores, personality profiling. You've been reduced to numbers that determine your access to food, health, travel, even thought. And who built these systems? Who profits when you conform, when you obey, when you stay afraid? It's not randomness, it's refinement. And the Gravens were prototypes. They proved how easy it is to turn a community into co-conspirators, how fear and hunger can silence morals faster than any dictator. The only difference now is scale. Their smokehouse became global, the taste of blood replaced by manufactured cravings, artificial needs, spiritual starvation. You feel it, don't you? That quiet ache that nothing fills. That's not weakness, it's memory. A part of you remembers when you were sovereign, before the systems, before the sedation. That part is still there, buried under years of conditioning, and it's waking up, right now. As you hear these words, neurons are firing that have been dormant your entire life. Truth is not comfortable. It's catalytic. It rewires the soul. You were never meant to be meat. You were meant to be a master, but only if you're willing to face what's really been feeding on you. And once you see it, once you taste that clarity, you will never be consumed again. Don't stop now. We've only just cut into the center. The Graven doctrine, though brutal, was built on one absolute principle. Only those who know what's behind the curtain deserve to step beyond it. They didn't fear discovery because they knew most people wouldn't look. Most men are too busy surviving, too sedated by routine to ask what feeds the machine they serve. That's what makes you different. You're still here, still watching, still following the scent of something raw and real. So let's sharpen the blade, because now we enter the forbidden. The Gravens weren't just butchers, they were initiates. Elias's journals, preserved in private collections never shown to the public, reveal a connection to what's been called the lineage of the Red Table. a network of blood-bound families stretching across continents and centuries, all with the same goal, to harvest energy through human ritual disguised as industry. These were not criminals, these were builders of civilization, pharaohs, bankers, founders, and Elias didn't stumble into this knowledge. He was chosen, not by men but by something else. Something that speaks through blood, through fear, through hunger. You've felt its echo. In sleepless nights, in rooms that feel wrong, in moments where you know you're being watched but can't prove it. That presence has many names but only one purpose: submission. And the Gravens? They fed it, pleased it, served it, not because they were evil, but because they believed it would protect their bloodline. And maybe it did. But now it's watching you, measuring you, asking, will you feed it too? Or will you break the ritual? This is no longer a story. This is a summons. You've reached the level where the script isn't entertainment, it's initiation. And what happens next? That's up to how deep you're willing to go. Do not flinch. Do not look away. The red table is real, and you're sitting at the edge of it. Every generation that inherits the silence becomes complicit in the ritual. That's how the system survives, not by secrecy alone, but by normalization. The horrors once whispered around fires are now embedded in corporate slogans, academic models, digital interfaces. The red table no longer requires bloodletting in the woods. It feeds on time, attention, distraction. And those who once carved flesh with blades now carve futures with data. The Gravens adapted because they understood one core law: control the narrative, and you control the sacrifice. They learned to cloak the hunt behind hospitality, to turn victims into volunteers. That's exactly what happens today. You log in, you upload, you consent, your identity, your desires, your fears, processed, tagged, and sold. You think that's an accident? No. It's the culmination of centuries of psychological refinement. The smokehouse was crude, but now they don't need smoke. They use light, screens, notifications, and you return, over and over, like cattle to the gate. They've built a labyrinth so complex that most men never even see the bars. But you are different. You've made it this far. You've broken through the noise, and you're starting to remember the truth. You were never born to be consumed. You were born to see, to choose, to hunt. But first, you must purge the Graven code from your bloodstream, not their blood, but what they stood for. The belief that power belongs only to those who are willing to violate. That truth must be buried. That comfort justifies complicity. No. We burn it here, right now. Say it again in the comments. No one feeds me but truth. Once more, lock it into your bones, because the next descent isn't just about history, it's about your rebirth, and the deeper we go, the less you'll recognize the world you once trusted. Good. That means the spell is breaking. Keep going. You feel it now, don't you? The fracture forming between the world you were taught and the one that's actually beneath it. That's not confusion, that's disinfection. The sickness was the certainty, the blind faith in structure, order, civility. But history has never been civil. It's been curated, polished by those who survived their own crimes and renamed them progress. The Graven family didn't invent horror. They refined it, institutionalized it, gave it rhythm, and in doing so they mirrored a truth so ancient it predates nations. The most successful predators aren't violent, they're persuasive. They offer deals, security, identity, and once you accept, they don't need to take your body. They take your will. And what's left of a man without will? A role, a function, a product. That's what most of modern life is. Voluntary servitude dressed as opportunity. But you weren't meant to serve. You were meant to see. To map the invisible hands that press against your choices. To recognize when comfort is camouflage. To know when the offer is a trap. And right now you're standing in the same place Elias Graven stood when he first tasted forbidden power. But unlike him, you're not surrounded by pine trees and silence. You're surrounded by signals, feeds, triggers, and the difference between slavery and sovereignty is how you respond. This is your line in the sand. You cross it, you don't go back. You begin to notice things others don't. You begin to question not just the lies, but the comfort the lies gave you. That's the price of awareness. But it's also the gateway to something few men ever touch: true autonomy. And the Gravens, for all their darkness, were closer to that than most. That's why they were dangerous. Not because they killed, but because they saw behind the mask and used it. Now it's your turn, but the question remains: will you wield what you see, or will you run from it like everyone else? Elias Graven once carved a message into the underside of a butcher's table, a message the flood failed to erase. Only those who eat the lie become invisible. Historians dismissed it as madness, the ravings of a broken man, but they missed the code. Eating the lie was never about flesh. It was about swallowing the false narrative so completely that you vanish within it. No longer a threat, no longer awake. And that's the goal of the system you live in now. Not to kill you, but to erase you through obedience, through quiet, through comfort. They don't need chains if you ask for the cage. But here's the difference. They didn't expect you to read this message. They didn't expect you to reach this depth. They thought you'd tune out after the horror faded, after the shock dulled, but you didn't. You stayed, you pressed forward, and now you're starting to see what Elias saw. That real power begins when you no longer believe the illusion is real. That's the secret they've spent centuries burying under patriotism, education, entertainment, politics. The idea that reality itself can be designed, and if it can be designed, it can be hacked. You feel it now, don't you? The way the world doesn't quite fit anymore. The way the edges don't align. That's not paranoia. That's perception. You're becoming visible to the invisible, and that makes you dangerous. Not because you'll lash out, but because you'll step out, step off their path, refuse their roles, question their gods. You were not built for the table, you were built to flip it. But first you must burn the script you were handed, all of it. Because until you do, every move you make will be in response to a lie you were never meant to challenge. And that's exactly what they count on. Keep watching. You're only beginning to remember who you really are. The deeper you go, the more you'll notice how the system mimics ritual. Daily routines become liturgies, algorithms become oracles, authority becomes priesthood, and you become the offering, cut into demographic slices, served to advertisers, data mined into obedience. The Gravens were honest in their brutality. Today's system is elegant in its deceit. It gives you the illusion of choice while steering every outcome. Scroll here, buy this, fear that, trust us, all while telling you that you're free. But freedom isn't the absence of chains, it's the presence of discernment, and discernment only comes after you've questioned everything that built your identity, your nation, your beliefs, your purpose. Elias Graven once said to his son, "The real butcher wears no apron." That was his warning. The most dangerous men don't show blood. They wear suits, smile, offer you a job, a cure, a future. But what they take in return is deeper than flesh. It's direction. And when you lose that, you become compliant meat, predictable, profitable, replaceable. That's the great inversion, convincing lions they're livestock. But you're waking up. And that waking isn't comfortable, it's violent. It tears through the skin of everything you thought was true. And beneath it, rage, grief, fire. Let it burn. Let it strip you down to the core truth. You were never meant to fit into this design. You were meant to disrupt it, to reclaim the path that was stolen before you were even born. But this isn't rebellion for rebellion's sake. This is about reconnection. To instinct, to sovereignty, to truth so sharp it cuts through every lie you've ever swallowed. You're close now, closer than you've ever been. And once you cross the next layer, you won't see the world the same way again. Good. You were never supposed to. There's a moment, quiet, internal, irreversible, when a man realizes he's been living into a script written by hands he'll never shake. That moment is sacred. It's dangerous. It's the moment the system loses its grip. Because once you see the cage, you can no longer worship the key. The Gravens understood this intimately. That's why their rituals weren't just for bloodletting, they were for breaking conditioning. Each act of horror shattered the masks of civilization. They weren't murdering out of madness. They were dissecting illusion. And now, in a world polished by touchscreens and false smiles, that same dissection must be internal. You must cut through the identities they gave you: consumer, voter, employee, sinner, citizen. Strip them away until nothing remains but will. Pure, unfiltered will, because that's what they fear. Men who remember what they are without permission. You've tasted the truth now. It's bitter, it's raw, and it's pure. Most will spit it out, recoil, retreat into distractions. But not you. You're still here. And that means you're not consuming this story. You're absorbing it, metabolizing it, becoming it. That's how transformation begins, not with motivation, but with destruction. The destruction of every inherited belief that was designed to pacify you. The Gravens may have used blades, but you must use awareness, the scalpel of truth, and you must wield it ruthlessly on everything you thought you needed, your habits, your allegiances, your comfort. Because comfort is the currency of control. Every soft edge in your life is a hand guiding you back to sleep. Burn it, all of it. Only then will the path reveal itself, not the one given to you, but the one you were born to carve. No more waiting, no more asking. From here on, you are the knife, and the world, the meat. The myth of the Graven family wasn't buried because it was unbelievable. It was buried because it was too believable, too close to the truth. Too reflective of what power has always done in secret. And that's what makes it dangerous. It mirrors the blueprint used to shape the very system you're in now. A hierarchy where bloodline, obedience and silence determine survival. Where entire towns, entire nations become accomplices out of fear or convenience. The Gravens didn't hypnotize the people of Hollow Creek. They simply gave them what they secretly wanted. Comfort without question, meat without memory. And in that exchange, morality died. That same transaction happens every day around you. Look closer. Every time someone stays silent while corruption thrives. Every time someone trades principle for paycheck. Every time someone pretends not to see the rot because it's wrapped in plastic and branded with a smile. That's the modern butcher shop. Sanitized, profitable, empty of soul. You were never supposed to question it. But now that you are, the mask begins to slip. And what's behind it isn't human. It's mechanical, ritualistic, designed to keep you just awake enough to function, but never free enough to resist. But that changes now. You've pierced the veil, you've seen the threads, and you know the truth. They didn't hide the system from you. They built it around you. Every screen, every label, every neatly trimmed illusion was placed there to keep your eyes away from the bones beneath the floorboards. But bones always rise, just like they did in 1892, just like they're doing now. The ground is soft, the rain is coming, and those who built their lives on silence are about to feel what truth tastes like when it's no longer hidden. Stay sharp, stay dangerous. We're not done yet. The storm didn't start with thunder. It started with whispers, the kind that crawl along floorboards and nest behind the walls, the kind that the Gravens fed like pets until they grew teeth of their own, because what they unleashed wasn't just terror, it was permission, a dark invitation to everyone watching, a test to see who would turn away and who would step closer, and those who stepped closer became part of it, not with blood oaths or secret symbols, but through complicity, through inaction, because nothing empowers a predator more than an audience pretending not to see. And in Hollow Creek, that pretense became ritual, a civic religion where everyone worshipped at the altar of denial, pretending the ash in the air came from wood, not flesh, pretending the late-night digging behind the chapel was maintenance, not mass burial. And the Gravens thrived in that silence, knowing that fear doesn't paralyze. It converts. It transforms ordinary people into accessories, not out of wickedness, but out of self-preservation. And that's the real horror. Not the screams in the cellar, but the calm above it, where tea was poured and sermons preached while bones turned to dust beneath polished shoes. And that's why this story matters. Not because it's over, but because it isn't. Because the world still runs on that same engine. Obedience wrapped in comfort, fear disguised as order. And if you think you're not part of it, ask yourself this. What have you chosen not to see, not to say, not to feel, just to keep your world intact? Because the Gravens didn't invent horror. They just refined it into a mirror, and now you're standing in front of it and it's staring back. You might think the Graven bloodline ended in the fires of 1892, when the townsfolk finally rose with pitchforks and torches, when the chapel cracked and the hidden graves beneath the altar spilled open like a confession too foul to contain. But that would be a convenient ending, wouldn't it? A neat little curtain drop on a story too ugly to digest. But evil like that doesn't burn. It spreads, it seeps into new soil, takes root in quieter places, changes its name and dons a new face. And some say one graven child escaped that night, carried off in the chaos by a loyal midwife who never spoke again. And decades later, strange births occurred in nearby counties. Children with black eyes and cold skin, children who didn't cry but watched, who stood too still too long. And wherever those children grew, disappearances followed. First pets, then neighbors, then entire records wiped clean like the land had swallowed them whole, and whispers spread of a new church with no cross, just a red door that never opened twice for the same person, and when it vanished all that remained was a scent like copper and earth and something else no one could name, and those who traced the history found dead ends, files missing, gravestones replaced with blank slates. But the pattern remained, a circle, always a circle, and in the middle something waiting, watching, patient. Because families like the Gravens don't just fade, they hibernate. And if you think the nightmare's over, check your town's oldest building. Dig beneath the floor, listen to the walls at night, because if you hear humming and it matches your heartbeat, you're not the first, and you won't be the last. And so it began again, not with violence but with hospitality. A newly arrived family in the town of Elmridge in 1924, who called themselves the Mortuaries, soft-spoken, polite, with starched collars and white gloves, who bought Tito. He abandoned schoolhouse at the edge of the woods and converted it into what they called a rest home for the weary, offering care for the sick, the grieving, and the mentally fragile, but something about their silence was too exact, too rehearsed, as though every smile was borrowed from a face that had forgotten how to feel, and the townsfolk, desperate for healing in the wake of the war and the flu, handed over their loved ones without question, grateful even, never noticing that no one ever came back out. Just letters, identical and typed, claiming the patient had found peace and would remain at the facility indefinitely. And when the postmaster asked why all the letters smelled faintly of vinegar and meat, he was told it was part of a new sterilization technique. And when a nurse vanished after her first week there, her cousin was told she'd eloped suddenly with a doctor who didn't exist. And soon Elmridge began to forget, the way towns do when forgetting becomes survival, until a boy named Elias, mute since birth, wandered into the woods one night and didn't come back for 3 days, and when he did, his hands were covered in ash, and he spoke for the first time, just one sentence. "The red door is open again," and everyone who heard him felt it, a shiver that had nothing to do with cold, like something ancient had stirred, and the Morrows kept smiling, kept waving from their iron fence, but behind their windows the lights flickered in a rhythm that matched the screams no one dared investigate, and the scent of vinegar grew stronger with each passing night. Sheriff Wallace tried to ignore it at first, the strange fog that clung only to the path leading to the Morrow rest home, the way his deputies avoided eye contact when he asked for patrol volunteers, the missing persons reports that never made it to his desk, but somehow ended up stamped and filed as resolved without his signature. But when Elias disappeared again, leaving behind only a trail of tiny handprints scorched into the wooden floor of his bedroom, Wallace could no longer pretend the town wasn't rotting from the roots, so one storm-heavy evening he rode out alone, revolver at his side, determined to face whatever secrets the Morrows were keeping. But when he arrived, the gate was already open, creaking slowly as if beckoning him in, and the building itself looked taller than he remembered, its windows elongated like watching eyes, and he stepped through the red door only to find a corridor far longer than the building's exterior allowed, with walls that pulsed subtly, almost like lungs exhaling mildew and rot. And as he moved deeper inside, his flashlight flickered against photographs lining the hall. Images of townspeople long dead, their faces scratched out, except for one figure always present beside them. A tall woman in mourning black, her face hidden beneath a lace veil, her hands always touching the subject's shoulder as if claiming them. And the deeper he went, the more he felt pulled, like gravity had shifted, until he reached a room filled with antique mirrors, none of which showed his reflection, only the Morrows standing behind him, silent and smiling, their mouths sewn shut with what looked like human hair, and before he could turn or scream or shoot, the room itself sighed, and the mirrors cracked simultaneously, bleeding something thick and dark that moved against the floor like it was searching for him. Sheriff Wallace fired once, but the bullet had never reached its mark. Instead, it disappeared mid-air as though swallowed by the house itself, and the mirror fluid slithered toward his boots with a mind of its own, whispering in voices he hadn't heard since childhood, voices of the dead, voices of regret, voices that knew his sins. And when he tried to retreat, the door he came through had vanished, replaced by another mirror reflecting not him, but a version of himself stitched together with surgical wire, eyes empty, uniform soaked in blood. And behind that doppelganger stood the Morrow family, unmoving, their sewn lips quivering with the effort of withheld screams. And in that moment Wallace understood. They weren't alive, not truly, nor were they dead, but something suspended in between, keepers of grief, harvesters of sorrow, fed by the forgotten. And just before the dark reached his throat, the sheriff saw the truth etched into the ceiling above. A massive mural painted in blood and ashes, depicting the town of Elmridge burning, its people praying to the veiled woman for salvation, trading their lives for peace again and again across centuries. And then the darkness took him, not like death but like drowning, slow and aware. And his last thought was not of fear but of surrender, as if some part of him had always belonged here, had always known that the red door would open for him too. And outside, the fog lifted briefly, just enough for the town to exhale, before the wind carried the faintest echo of stitched whispers across the fields. Another has joined the fold. The town didn't search for Sheriff Wallace, not really. Instead, they held a quiet memorial, closed his file, and appointed a new man who never asked questions, who kept his rounds far from the rest home. And soon the fog returned like a ritual breath, curling through the streets at dusk, muffling sounds that didn't want witnesses, and children were taught not to play near the woods, not because of wolves, but because of the air, the way it thickened near the tree line like it had weight, like it remembered every scream it had ever swallowed. And the Morrows continued as always, still, polite, present, but unapproachable. Except now more of them appeared, quiet figures in black walking the town at dusk, their faces pale and their shadows somehow lagging behind their steps, and they brought with them small gifts. Jars of strange jam no one remembered tasting but always seemed to have, candles that burned with blue flame and never melted down, and people accepted them because that's what the town had always done. Accept what could not be explained as long as it came with calm, with comfort, with the absence of chaos. But deep in the bones of Elmridge something shifted, a tension building beneath the routines, because the truth never stays buried, not forever. And late at night, behind locked doors, old families whispered the name Graven again, not as myth but as inheritance, and a few began to ask, quietly, dangerously, if the Morrows had ever been strangers at all, or if they had simply returned to reclaim what they once ruled, cloaked in new names, new rituals, same hunger. And as the fog thickened each night, the town's silence deepened, not out of ignorance, but out of recognition. In the cellar beneath the funeral home, behind shelves of embalming fluid and books bound in flesh-like vellum, a room pulsed with a heartbeat not its own, its walls lined with jars that contained more than organs. Each sealed vessel held a memory, a scream, a prayer unfinished, and in the center stood the oldest Morrow, Grandmother Elspeth, skin like parchment, eyes sealed shut with wax, hands moving in gestures older than language, and as she stirred the basin of black fluid, images rose, faces of those yet to come, townsfolk marked unknowingly, souls already promised before birth, and her whisper was not sound but sensation, threading through the bones of the house, calling the family inward, summoning them to prepare, because the time was near, the great reckoning, the final folding of Elmridge into the place beneath, the hollow, where the graven line would be restored and grief would become currency, sacrifice the economy, and those who resisted would find themselves unmoored, unable to speak without bleeding truth, unable to dream without visiting the morrow dead, who had not rested but waited, patient and hungry. And outside a baby cried in a cradle made of bone and ivy, watched by a young girl with silver eyes who hummed a lullaby in a tongue that hadn't been heard since the monastery fires of 1342. And when the child opened his mouth, he didn't cry, he laughed, and it echoed through the roots of the house like thunder beneath soil, and Elspeth smiled though her eyes were sealed, for she knew the next vessel had arrived. The townspeople began to feel it before they saw it, food turning to ash in their mouths, clocks skipping seconds only to repeat them, mirrors briefly reflecting not themselves but someone else watching from behind their eyes, and animals once loyal began snarling at closed doors or cowering from empty corners, and the church bell rang at impossible hours, even though the rope had long been cut, and Father Harlan, the last priest brave enough to speak the old blessings, was found kneeling on the altar, eyes gone, palms slit with the mark of the graven spiral, and though his mouth had been sewn shut, blood had spelled one word across the marble floor: repent. But no one dared clean it, not even the new priest, who never preached, only stood silently, always facing the west wall where shadows gathered like waiting mourners, and the morrows no longer pretended. They walked openly through the market, all in black, with the air warping around them like heat on stone, and people stepped aside without knowing why, without meeting their eyes, as if their instincts remembered what their minds refused, and children drew pictures of the funeral home that showed too many windows, too many chimneys, and one child who spoke in her sleep described a staircase with no bottom and doors that opened into places not meant for the living. And the school burned down that winter, though there was no fire, only smoke that lingered for weeks, seeping into walls and lungs and dreams. And it became clear the Morrowies weren't just returning, they were reclaiming, and Elmridge was no longer resisting, only remembering the shape of surrender. Sheriff Dalton, a man whose lineage traced back to the town's founders, once confident in law and order, began waking each night at exactly 3:13 a.m., drenched in sweat, heart pounding to the rhythm of a chant he couldn't unhear, and each morning his fingernails waggy, hair blackened as if he'd been clawing through soil, and his patrol logs became erratic, pages torn, scribbles in a language no linguist could identify, and when he tried to confront the Morrows, he found the path to their estate winding endlessly, the house always shifting, doors never leading to the same room twice, and in the station, surveillance footage glitched whenever the Morrows passed, images warping into static, or showing brief flashes of skeletal forms draped in ceremonial garb from centuries past, and one clip showed Elspeth standing at the window, long dead but watching him still, her mouth moving though no sound played, and yet the deputies who viewed it screamed and tore at their ears, begging to forget. And when Dalton finally returned to the house with a Bible and a rusted revolver, he was invited in as though expected, the door opening with a whisper of welcome, and inside the walls pulsed like breathing flesh, candles burning with flames the color of dried blood, and portraits moved subtly as if watching, and in the grand parlor he found every Morrow seated silently, eyes fixed on him, and Elspeth, impossibly alive, spoke in a voice like bone breaking under frost, telling him he'd come not to stop them but to join them, for he too was born of grief, touched by the old sorrow, and as his revolver crumbled to rust in his hands, he remembered things he had never lived, screams from another lifetime, and as he dropped to his knees, the house swallowed his last breath like communion. After Sheriff Dalton vanished, the town spiraled into a strange quiet. No alarm, no panic, just an eerie stillness, like the land itself was holding its breath. And in that silence, the Morrow estate began to rot in reverse, its paint freshening, shingles aligning, hedges blooming with black-petaled flowers that hadn't grown in Montana for centuries, and townsfolk, unable to explain why, found themselves drawn to the edge of the Morrow property at dusk, standing silently, hands clasped, eyes vacant, as if awaiting a sermon that never came. And children began drawing symbols in the dirt they didn't remember learning, while their parents, pale and withdrawn, muttered blessings not from any known Bible. And Pastor Whitlow tried to intervene. He stood before the church one Sunday screaming of sin and wrath and damnation, only for his throat to swell shut mid-sermon, his mouth gaping like a fish. And by nightfall his pulpit burned to ash without fire, only a cold wind that sucked the heat from marrow. And then the dreams began, collective, identical, shared among the town like a virus of the soul. The same red hallway, the same whisper behind the wall, the same invitation carved into flesh, not with pain but with promise. And it was then the town finally understood that what the Morrowies had revived wasn't just a cult or a ritual or even a family tradition, but something deeper, older than the dirt beneath their boots, something that fed not on blood, but on acquiescence, on the slow surrender of doubt. And as they gathered before the house on the seventh night, no longer strangers but participants, they didn't speak, they knelt. The night of the kneeling, the sky above Elmridge rippled like disturbed water, stars dimming as if veiled by something vast and alive. And though no one remembered walking, they all arrived barefoot, clothed in the same soil-stained garments, faces slack but eyes wide with some terrible clarity. And the Morrows stood at the threshold of their home, Eliza at the center, her once youthful face now ageless and unreadable, flanked by the twins who hadn't aged in decades, and behind them in the shadows of the doorway stood figures no one dared count, shapes vaguely human but wrong in proportions, swaying gently as if breathing in the town's reverence. And the front doors opened with a groan that sounded almost like laughter, not mechanical but sentient. And one by one, without command or hesitation, the townspeople crawled forward on hands and knees, entering not the house they knew, but a place behind reality, where the air was too thick, the angles too sharp, the colors all wrong. And once inside, they saw the truth. That the funeral home had never been a house but a gate, built atop a wound in the world. And the Morrows were not murderers or cultists, but stewards, chosen not by bloodline but by sacrifice, keepers of the dead who did not sleep but watched and waited and fed. And as the door closed behind the last soul, the house exhaled, its walls shivering with satisfaction, the windows glowing faintly red like eyes blinking awake after a long hibernation. Outside, Elmridge stood abandoned yet untouched by time, shops still stocked, lights still flickering in empty homes, meals rotting on tables as if the residents had simply stepped out for air and never returned. But no one came looking. No one questioned the silence because official records showed Elmridge had been uninhabited since 1871 after a mining collapse poisoned the water supply. Except there had never been any mines, and the land wasn't on any geological fault line. And the names of the Morrow family didn't appear on any census past 1824, as if they had been excised from history by something that didn't want them remembered. And yet stories still trickled out, whispered between truckers and surveyors, tales of a place where GPS glitches, compasses spin, and radio static hums with children's lullabies. And sometimes, if you park near where the town once was, your car doors unlock on their own, and a cold voice from the back seat asks if you've come for the offering. And if you don't answer, nothing happens, at first. But days later, your dreams change, and you wake up with dirt under your nails, and a memory of kneeling in a place with red walls and no sky. And though you never find Elmridge again, you do start noticing things, strangers at the edge of your vision who disappear when you turn, reflections that blink out of sync, and a lingering scent of embalming fluid when you pass by funeral homes, and slowly, as your life frays and your name feels unfamiliar in your own mouth, you realize Elmridge didn't vanish. It moved. And it's waiting, because the Morrows were never confined to one town or one time, only one purpose. And when your door creaks open on a windless night, you'll finally understand. You've been invited home. And once you're home, it doesn't feel like terror at first. It feels like familiarity, like muscle memory you didn't know you had as your fam. It carries you down halls lined with faded wallpaper, pulsing like living skin, Portraits of the Morrow ancestors watching with eyes that follow not from artistry but from animation, their lips twitching into smiles the longer you stare. And in the parlor where the family once embalmed their victims beneath oil lamps and prayer hymns, a table has been set with place cards marked in blood, one of them bearing your name in a script you've never written but instantly recognize as your own. And as you sit, compelled by something older than choice, you see the others arrive. Hollow-eyed travelers like you, drawn from every decade, every region, all seated in perfect silence until the matriarch enters, her skin translucent, her veins crawling with black ichor, her mouth stitched shut, not from death but reverence, and with one gesture of her broken finger, the feast begins. Silver domes lifted to reveal not food but relics, teeth, tongues, scraps of clothing soaked in regret, and with each item a story is spoken not with words but with visions that pierce your mind like nails, showing you the exact moment of every victim's final breath, until the room spins with the weight of memory and you realize this dinner is not for nourishment but for inheritance. And when the final course is served, a mirror, it is passed to you, and you are told without speaking, look and claim what is yours, and when you do, you see not your reflection but your true face, the one hidden beneath your skin all your life, the face of a Morrow reborn, not by blood but by sacrifice. And as the mirror shatters in your hands, your mouth opens on its own, and a voice older than language escapes, chanting the rite, welcoming the others, sealing the covenant, because now it's your turn to bring someone home. And as you rise from the table, shards of the shattered mirror embedded in your palms like sacred sigils, the room begins to dissolve, not with fire, not with collapse, but with memory being pulled back layer by layer until only you remain in that vast dim space where the walls breathe and the floor pulses and time no longer moves forward but loops endlessly. And within that loop you hear them, the voices of the family, whispering secrets you were never meant to know, secrets that burn when you understand them and burn worse when you don't, secrets that unravel the false life you thought you lived before stepping foot in this cursed house. And as you walk toward the embalming chamber, where your hands instinctively find blades, salts, binding ropes, your mind is no longer screaming but humming, calm in its awakening. Your body knowing each movement like a ritual you've always performed in dreams, because now the house has claimed you, not just as heir but as instrument, as architect of sorrow. And when you open the cellar door and see the trembling shape of the one you brought back, your offering, their eyes wide with pleading and disbelief, you don't flinch, because it is not cruelty that guides you but destiny, not evil but legacy. And when the blade kisses their throat and the blood flows like scripture across the floorboards, the house moans in satisfaction, not haunted but fed. And you know in that moment you are no longer a visitor or a victim, but the next chapter in the book written in flesh, your heartbeat echoing in rhythm with the floor, the walls, the hidden choir singing beneath the floorboards, welcoming you home forever. The rain outside stops as if silenced by command. The air thickens and the house exhales through its cracked windows and rotting wood, settling like a creature no longer hungry but expectant. And you feel it now, not as fear, but as purpose. Each heartbeat syncing with the hidden pulse that runs beneath the foundation, where ancient sins were buried in cement and bone, and as you step out of the chamber, your clothes soaked in warmth that no longer disturbs you, you begin to see clearly for the first time, portraits on the walls shifting, their painted eyes blinking in approval, ancestors you never met nodding from within their gilded frames, the legacy of the Grimhearts not ending in horror but transforming through it, refining its methods with each generation. And you, yes, you, are the finest blade in their collection, shaped by betrayal, forged in trauma, now sharpened to perfection by the house's will, and as the sun sets for the final time in your mind, you walk toward the parlor where a new guest is being ushered in by no one and yet by everything, their name already etched into the ledger you found in the attic, their sins already tallied, and as they cross the threshold, something inside you smiles, not your lips, not your face, but that deeper self that the house carved free from fear, and you welcome them not as a host, not as a killer, but as the inevitable, the final chapter they didn't know they were writing the moment they said yes to an invitation that no one remembers sending. The door creaks open with the same reverence as a coffin lid at a private burial, and in steps a man dressed in city arrogance and ignorance, a real estate appraiser who thinks he's come to assess value but is instead being weighed himself, every footstep he takes echoing against the hollow ribcage of the house's memory, the walls drinking him in like blood into soil, and you watch from the shadows of the drawing room, unseen yet intimately felt, the way your ancestors once watched their prey, unblinking, unfeeling, unhurried, because the ritual is no longer rage but ritual, no longer violence but inheritance. And the man pauses by the fireplace, admiring a crooked portrait of a woman he doesn't recognize, unaware it's your great-aunt Josephine, who stitched the mouths shut of liars during the famine of 1857, and as he reaches to straighten the frame, the temperature drops, the room tightens, and the floorboards hum beneath your feet like an orchestra of buried truths ready to crescendo, and when he turns around to find you standing there, not with a weapon, not with a threat, but simply with the full weight of knowing, you see his confusion give way to a fear so primal it bypasses language, and he whispers, "This place, it isn't for sale, is it?" And you smile, not because it's funny, but because the house always chooses who stays and who feeds, and tonight it has chosen, not for hunger but for message, not for cruelty but for continuation. And as he runs, because they always run, you do not chase, for the house will guide him exactly where he's meant to be, each hallway folding like a throat around its next secret. And you walk behind him slowly, hands clasped, patient as a clock with no numbers, knowing the Grimheart legacy never rushes, it simply waits and devours. The man's footsteps thunder down the corridor, each one swallowed by the thick carpet of dust and memory. His breath sharp and ragged like an animal caught in the jaws of a trap, and the house, oh, the house, comes alive around him, doors shutting of their own accord, lights flickering not from electricity but remembrance, as if the very air pulses with the heartbeat of every soul it has consumed, and you follow at a deliberate pace, never needing to run, for no one escapes what has already claimed them, and the wallpaper peels back in strips like old flesh, revealing hidden inscriptions beneath, symbols etched in languages forgotten by time but remembered by blood, the same blood that courses through your veins, the same blood that once painted the basement walls when your great-grandfather held seances to commune with ancestors who preferred screams to words, and the man stumbles into the solarium, a room long sealed off, where light no longer enters and sound never escapes, and he turns to face you, shaking, muttering apologies as if innocence could be bartered, as if mercy were ever part of your inheritance, and you tilt your head, curious, as the vines growing through the cracked windows seem to slither toward him, wrapping his ankles, testing his resolve, and you do not touch him. Not yet, for the house itself demands the offering, and in a moment that stretches into eternity, he understands that he was never a visitor but a sacrifice summoned by ancestral will, and as the shadows reach higher, engulfing him, you whisper the old family phrase taught to every child born in the Grimheart line. The house remembers who belongs, and who must feed it. And the scream that follows is not heard by the outside world, not because of distance, but because Thornhaven Manor exists just slightly out of sync with the world beyond its gates, like a forgotten breath between heartbeats, a whisper between centuries, a curse still hungry. Outside, the wind dies completely, as if nature itself pauses to listen, the trees bowing under a pressure no weather chart could explain, and within Thornhaven's rotting frame, silence settles like dust, thick and ancient, broken only by the slow, deliberate echo of your steps as you descend once more into the cellar, the cradle of the Grimheart bloodline, where the stones are slick with the memory of rituals and the air is damp with breath that doesn't belong to the living. And as you move past the iron door, the one no outsider has ever touched without consequence, you feel it again. The subtle pulse, like a second heartbeat beneath your skin, the tether that binds you not just to the house, but to the thing beneath it, older than your name, older than language, wrapped in roots and bones and sealed promises, and you kneel before the cracked slab at the center, whispering the names of the family one by one, all the way back to the first, the butcher witch from 1534, who carved men into angels and fed them to the soil. And as the last name leaves your lips, the ground shudders, not violently, but like something exhaling from a long slumber, and a faint light, grey and cold, seeps up through the floorboards, illuminating the faded symbol etched in ash and marrow, the one only grim hearts can see. And the house hums with approval, satisfied, not because of the man consumed, but because the bloodline still remembers, still obeys. And in that moment, you understand the truth passed through generations, not by words, but instinct. The house doesn't haunt, it feeds. And so long as it is fed, the grim hearts remain, untouched by time, hidden by myth, protected by a hunger so deep it forgets nothing, forgives nothing. And you smile, not from joy, but from the comfort of belonging, of purpose, of being the living answer to an ancient question carved into every beam of Thornhaven. Who will remember when the world forgets? And so you rise, the cellar's cold breath curling around your spine like a serpent of approval, and as the final echoes of your whispered invocation dissolve into the stone, the sigil beneath your feet pulses once more, brighter, bolder, hungrier, as if awakened fully for the first time in decades, and the walls respond in kind with a groan of shifting wood and whispering shadows, the very marrow of Thornhaven creaking as though stretching after centuries of slumber. And you make your way up through the narrow corridor, the air now thick with the metallic scent of old blood, and something more arcane, more potent, as if the house itself exudes the breath of a beast finally stirred. And as you step into the main hall where portraits of the grim heart dead leer with pride and accusation, your eyes meet the largest one, the founder whose gaze was rumored to follow even the boldest intruder. And in that moment the paint seems to shimmer, and the eyes seem to blink. And you do not flinch because now you understand the pact, the inheritance, the cost, and as the grandfather clock chimes midnight, its broken hands somehow realigning for the first time in years, the front door opens, not by wind, not by hand, but by invitation, and the next visitor enters, lost, desperate, drawn to the legend of a house that devours memory and spits out stories whispered by firelight, and you smile again, stepping back into the shadows where you belong, where all grim hearts belong, unseen yet ever present, the stewards of a hunger older than sin. And as the door creaks shut behind them and the house settles into silence once more, Thornhaven breathes in, and you know this story will never truly end, because as long as one grim heart remains to feed the myth, the house will always wake, always whisper, and always remember.